And I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our speaker to you, Mr. Cy Kellett, whom many of you recognize as the host of Catholic Answers Live and Catholic Answers Focus. By the way, Cy might not be aware of this, but we had his predecessor, Patrick Coffin, as our guest speaker several years ago. And you're both Irish, to the best of my knowledge, so happy belated St. Patrick's Day. I'm actually a big fan of Catholic Answers. It's part of my reversion story when we had Ave Maria Radio here in Southwest Florida. One of my favorite guest speakers on Cy's show is Jimmy Akin. I don't think I've ever seen him stumped. I encourage you to tune in and through podcast or app, however you are able to watch it. It's available in both venues. So Cy Kellett comes from a large Irish Catholic family in Massachusetts. He has a degree in theology from Boston College. Prior to Catholic Answers, he hosted The Bright Side with Cy Kellett on the Immaculate Heart Radio Network. For more than a decade, he was editor of San Diego's diocesan newspaper, The Southern Cross. Before that, he taught high school, and then he spent several years working with the mentally ill and the homeless in Massachusetts while actually living in a Catholic worker house. So he lives in California, and he and his wife have 3 children. Something you might not know about Cy is that he has a new book coming out in April called A Teacher of Strange Things. So please join me now in welcoming to Faith and Wine and Faith and Ale, Mr. Cy Kellett. Welcome, Cy.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction.
Of course. So, A Teacher of Strange Things. Are you sure that you're not in collaboration with Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on that book?
Well, apparently there's a TV show that everybody knows about that I didn't know about when we named it called Stranger Things. But no, although I have to say, Jimmy's a big influence on me, and there's no way I could have written that book without the hours and hours and hours I've spent with Jimmy Akin.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I noticed that you're both science fiction fans, and I noticed that you wrote a book, Ad Limina, which has a science fiction basis. So that's wonderful. So I am going to go ahead and mute myself. I know you have a lot to share with us this evening. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much. I apologize to everybody for the somewhat sterile background. I'm actually away from home, so I'm in another spot, and I brought my Joan of Arc to put behind me, but I couldn't figure out a way to keep Joan up there. So she's here with me, and I'm a great, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a great, I don't think fan is the right word, but a great admirer of Joan of Arc. And if you don't know about Joan of Arc, she's greater than you expect when you meet her. And tomorrow I'm going to actually do a talk with some kids about Joan of Arc. So you can pray for me on that, because you always need prayers when you're talking to kids. Tonight, we're going to talk about whatever happened to the modern world. And often when we don't have a virus around and I can be in front of people talking, whatever I'm talking about, I ask them how they think it's going with the modern world. How's everything going? How's that working out? And usually people laugh at that, because it strikes them as an almost you would say like absurd question, because clearly it doesn't matter what side of the political or economic spectrum you are on, things are not going well. Where our society is in very difficult times. And I want to talk a bit about that. And I want to go back to the very beginning of the modern world to do it. And I'll tell you right now from the beginning, before I even start, that my hope is that in reflecting on what happened to the modern world, you will have an opportunity to become really proud, I suppose, in a good way, not in the negative way, not in the sinful way, but proud of your Christian faith in new ways. Maybe as we explore some stuff that everybody kind of knows already, but I'll try to put it in a Christian context that gives a sense of how sad it is and how dangerous it is to lose the Christian faith, for a society to lose the Christian faith. So that's where I hope we'll get to, is just a deeper appreciation of the value, the social value of our Christian faith. And many people, let me just give you a little anecdote. One time I'm in San Francisco and talking to, you've been to San Francisco? You can guess how popular I am there, probably as a Catholic. But in San Francisco, talking to a group of people, many of whom were scientists or technology people, okay? And I asked them about the Middle Ages. And I talked about this guy in the Middle Ages, who's Gerbert was his name, and he was the first person to bring the abacus into Europe during the early part of the Middle Ages. He was a great scientist. He was a great advocate of science. He was and then he made his way to Rome. And I asked these scientists and technologists, what do you think they did to him in the Middle Ages? This great scientist, mathematician, thinker, this person who introduced like the abacus to Europe. What do you think they did to him when he got to Rome? And they said things like burned him at the stake, or stoned him, or imprisoned him, and all that. And I have to say, a look of shock came over their faces when I said they made him Pope. His name is Pope Sylvester II. And that's what the Middle Ages was really like. And you might be saying, why is he going back to the Middle Ages? Because the first thing to know about the modern world is that the thing that we say about the modern world everywhere, on TV, in books, even in history classes in school, is that the modern world was built on the failures of the medieval world. We think of ourselves as recovering from the failures, from the superstition that people talk all the time about, the superstition, the darkness, and all that. That's not true. The modern world is built on the successes of the medieval world. And I don't even like to say medieval world. I prefer to use the word Christendom, where by the time you get to about the year, say, 1200, around the time of St. Thomas Aquinas, you have a multicultural, multilingual society that stretches from Jerusalem all the way to Iceland, and from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain and Portugal, all the way to Germany, and even into Russia or Poland, and all the East. A massive society held together not by force, all held together by devotion to Jesus Christ and by the fact that they all went to Mass every Sunday. They were all connected around this idea. Now, later, that society will go out into the world with ships and go to places like Africa and South America and North America. And we might say, well, why did it take so long? Well, that world, that Christian world, that Christendom actually had a physical barrier between it and Africa and Asia. And that physical barrier was Islam. Islam rose up. And so we often now have this complaint that, well, Christianity was colonialist and Christianity was, just a European phenomenon. But there's a reason for that. The Christians of Europe had to wait until they had developed the technology to go to sea before they could go out and share the Christian faith beyond Europe, because they were blocked in by a very powerful Islam in North Africa and Asia. And that's why we end up with Christians going out to sea as soon as they had the technology to do it. Going out, and Christopher Columbus is an example. Why did Christopher Columbus go to the New World? Many people don't know this about him, but Christopher Columbus went to the New World because he believed that Jerusalem should be Christian. What? How does that add up? He believed that Jerusalem should be Christian, and he thought if he went the other way around the world and reached Japan and China, he could make so much money for the Spanish crown that the Spanish crown could free Jerusalem whenever, because Jerusalem went back and forth from Christian and Muslim hands. So he really did have the idea of restoring and spreading the faith. That's why they went out to sea. What did they do in the Middle Ages? They developed what's called the modern university system: bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctorates. They developed hospitals. The oldest hospital in the world is in London. It started in the 11th century. Okay, so the modern idea of the hospital. And when you ask yourself, what are the great buildings of the modern world? Think about this. What are our greatest buildings, our most impressive buildings? Well, they're sports arenas. They're sports stadiums. Like in say Dallas, where the Dallas Cowboys play. These are the most impressive buildings that we built. If you went back to ancient Rome and you said, what's the most impressive buildings of the Romans? They would have been sports facilities. They would have been places like the Colosseum. Not in the Middle Ages, not during Christendom. The greatest buildings of Christendom, Chartres Cathedral, the greatest building ever built. Notre Dame Cathedral. These are 11th, 12th, 13th century buildings. The Middle Ages didn't fail, it succeeded. That's why we got the modern world in Europe. That's why it was born in Europe, because the Middle Ages succeeded. And so you ended up in the 12th, 13th, 14th century. And it's also true that in the 14th century, the plague came and there was a great collapse. And well, we can be sympathetic ourselves to how the plague can bring a stop to a whole world. And that plague was much worse. In some countries, as many as half the people wiped out by the plague. All right. But then the Italian Renaissance followed that. And then out of that, we get the modern world, even the modern world of engineering. If any of you are engineers, you probably learned about Brunelleschi's dome in, the Great Duomo I'm sorry, I'm going to forget the city, but Florence, the Great Dome of Florence. This is the first modern architecture. This is what medieval people did. This is what the medieval life flowered into. Now, we think of the modern world, and I'm going to say the modern world starts in the year 1517. And so we're going to do a little history from the year 1517 to today to talk about what happened that at the end of the Middle Ages in 1517, everybody believed in God. And you come to today, and you have to struggle to believe in God. It's a fight to maintain your faith in God. Young people lose their faith in the 6th grade. I have lots of, they tell me about that. 6th grade, they're losing their faith because of things they read on the internet or videos they watch. It's hard to believe in God now. So what happened? Because this is connected to the kind of life we live and really the widespread kind of loneliness, a widespread kind of anxiety, addiction, all of this that we have widespread around the modern world. I mean, even in recent years, the horror of suicide, because more and more and more, even young people taking their lives because they feel so desperate. Why do people feel desperate? We have everything. The most materially successful period in the history of the world. I'm talking to you, and none of us are in the same room. I mean, you needed to be, St. John or somebody with great powers of bilocation to do that before. Now I'm talking to you, and none of us are in the same room. Why are we so heartbroken and desperate? And so many people feel desperately alone in the modern world. What happened over that 500 years from 1517 to now? And then by doing that, I think we get a sense of what has been lost, because the story that if you go take a history class of the modern period in any university or high school, what they're going to talk about is progress. They're going to say, we started here at the end of the Middle Ages. They're not going to say Christendom. And they won't tell them about the Black Plague of the 13th or the 14th century, because what they want to create, or what we have created, is a propaganda that everything was dark and ugly in the Christendom. And then along came the light of scientific revolutions and enlightenments and all that. But it's true, Europe was struggling after the plague. But then even the Renaissance is a Catholic phenomenon. But what they'll tell you is, from ships and horses, there's this line of progress that goes up over 500 years. And it's not just a line, it's a curve. It gets more and more intense, this progress, until now we go to space and our cars drive themselves and we talk to one another like we're talking to each other right now. This is clearly there's this progress. That's not wrong. That's the truth. There is that upward curve of progress. The story that is not told, and that's the one that I really want to spend just a little while reflecting on now, is the story of a simultaneous decline. Look at painting today. Look at modern art painting. Is that a curve of progress from the paintings of Michelangelo or Titian, or has art gone up? What about our music? The music that we enjoy, is that just a steady progress like this? Or is there something to the polyphonic music that's more beautiful than anything we can make today, or that anyone does make today, except for a few composers like Avril Peart and a few others? Who's making music like was made then? So I want to stress that this is not a lie. The progress of the modern world is not a lie. But what is a deception is to not talk about the other curve, the sense of decline. And more than anything, that decline is felt in what people are, in their soul today, what the opportunities they believe there are for their soul. It's very different than what it was 500 years ago. So first, we have this vast, totally covers Europe community around the Pope, and the real center of that community is the celebration of the Eucharist every Sunday. Okay, and every day, but the community gathers every Sunday. And that goes on for 1,000 years. And you think it doesn't make a difference in a society to have 1,000 years of feeding on Christ as a society? 1,000 years of on the wall, there's a crucifix. And we build these great structures like the great cathedrals. That makes a difference to the human soul, 1,000 years of that. And in 1517, the reason I picked 1517, of course, as you have probably already guessed, is that's the year that Martin Luther makes his great objection, his great public objection to the Catholic Church. And Christianity shatters. Now, I do not want to get into a kind of historical debate about Luther as a reformer or Luther as an anti-reformer, all that. That's not what my point. My point is, there was a thing called liturgical Christianity that everybody lived for 1,500 years after the death of Jesus. Whether you were Orthodox in the East or Catholic in the West, you lived liturgical Christianity. You fed on God every Sunday. And that shattered after 1517, to the point where there are millions and hundreds of millions of Christians alive today who don't know that the 6th chapter of John's Gospel means that you are to really receive his body and blood, his soul and divinity in the Eucharist. That shattering of liturgical Christianity shattered a whole world. It broke a whole world apart. And it just keeps breaking after that. That's a real loss. See, what the modern historian cannot see is that the loss of feeding on Christ is actually a real loss. That does damage to the human soul, to human society. And this is the beginning of 500 years of both progress and decline. Both progress and decline over the subsequent 500 years. The problem with shattering liturgical Christianity like that and separating Christianity from the Pope is it has no end. There is no end point for that. It will just keep shattering and breaking, going down. And I'm not talking about there being Lutherans and Baptists and Methodists. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about other people come along and go, well, I'll tell you what, if we can live well without the church, without the Catholic Church, and without that liturgy, we can probably live fine without Jesus. And now we come to, after the great northern breaking of Northern European shattering of Christianity, so that people are not liturgically united anymore. I just want you to keep having this in your mind. 1,500 years of being united around a liturgy, shattered after 1517. Then the next phase comes. And this comes from the South with the great wealth that comes into Europe from the Italian Renaissance and the maritime republics. Then we get these French thinkers, right? And France, the great homeland of the Christian faith, the homeland of the Christian faith that gave us Joan of Arc. Okay? Then there come men like Rousseau, who say, and they're deists essentially, and Voltaire, who say, well, we believe in God, just like you Christians believe in God, but we don't need this Jesus with all the miracles. We're going to do this by reason. So the thing that had shattered before, where Protestants began to emphasize the word over the sacrament, now we don't need the word or the sacrament. We've got it here. We're going to reason our way. Okay? And then you get other great deist figures, like some of the founders of our own country, like Thomas Jefferson, who was not a Christian. Thomas Jefferson said, nature and nature's God give us our rights. He's right about that. Our rights are derived, according to the Declaration of Independence, from nature and nature's God, not from the Trinity, not from Christ. You see, all of that had been shattered. All that had been broken by what's called the Enlightenment, but in many ways was also the Endarkenment, where people lost connection to this bright, beautiful culture of Christendom. And so Thomas Jefferson says, and Thomas Jefferson is right, we get our rights from nature and nature's God. But that's a deist way of speaking, and you see Jesus is out of the picture now. Jesus has been moved out of the picture. So I want you to think again about that decline of the modern world. So first, the first step of decline is to shatter liturgical Christianity, to move people, to starve people of the Eucharist. The next move is to say, well, we don't need Jesus. We can be good without Jesus. And they do many good things. I personally think the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, these are good things. But there's things that have their roots in Christendom that is bit by bit being rejected. Could we write the Constitution today as a people? Could we produce the Declaration of Independence today as a people? No, we could not. We could not bring ourselves together to do something like that. That's what I'm talking about steps of decline. The next step of the decline happens after about 1820. Because if you think about 1820, that's the general first year of the Industrial Revolution. People were jammed into cities. The environment was greatly, when they talk about Manchester, England, the greatest industrial city in the world, it went from a little town of about 30 or 40,000 people to a city of 2 million over a course of 10 years during the early Industrial Revolution. A city that was so full of smoke that you couldn't see the sun during the day. And then people began to feel isolated from one another. The Industrial Revolution sets the stage for what will happen later in the 19th century. And of course, 1859 is an important date in this. 1859, why? Because that's the year that Charles Darwin proposes the theory of evolution, a theory that has nothing to do with religion and does not offend us as Catholics at all. And yet, people were so weak in their faith by that time that this new scientific evolutionary way of thinking broke something. And so the first loss is the loss of the liturgical church. The second loss is the loss of the person of Christ. The third loss happens in the 19th century, and it's the loss of God. People like Karl Marx, people like Charles Darwin, who may have been innocent in this. I'm not trying to blame him of that thing, but Marx certainly was not innocent. And then even a little bit later, people like Sigmund Freud. Their view is we can figure this out without God. They've gone beyond even Rousseau and Voltaire. We'll do this without God. And this idea, like you think about the Communist Internationale, the Communist International Anthem, no gods, no kings, reason thunders in its crater. That's the words to the Internationale. That's what we became by the beginning of the 20th century. And by the end of the 19th century, there was great positive feeling about what was happening in the modern world. The 1890s were called the gay 90s because people were so positive about what was happening. The early part of the 20th century, a real conviction that, like when you think about the birth of movements like the progressivist movement and Teddy Roosevelt, just great, really powerful optimism. Because we could do this now. We know how to. And so Europe began to think about what happened in Europe in the early part of the 20th century. People were not thinking about God as a necessary condition for a peaceful society. They were talking about a new thing called a balance of power. The British would balance the Russians. The Germans would balance the Italians. There would be this great balance of power. See, what they started to think of the world as a machine. And as a machine, we'll just fine tune it. That's what we'll do. We'll just fine tune it and then everything will be fine. And all the way up till June of 1914, that worked great. But you know what happened in June of 1914? Archduke Ferdinand is shot. And they were living like we're living now in June of 1914. At peace, could not imagine a world war. At peace, without a thought of a world war. By August, 2 months later, by August of 1914, world war. Men being killed by the tens of thousands. And it went on year after year. While the Pope in Rome begged them to stop. While this was Christian people killing Christian people, the faith of the Germans was the exact same faith that the British were living. The Russians were Christians. The Italians were Christians. The only people who weren't, the Ottoman Empire to the south. But they couldn't stop it because you can't order a society like it's a machine. People are not machines. Our souls matter. And when the soul becomes corrupt, war follows, always, every time. And that's what happened. And so you have this terrible, terrible period from 1914 to 1945 with World War I, a depression, World War II. And World War II ends with horrors like the world has never seen. And it ends with a test called the Trinity test. They called it the Trinity test, where they exploded the first nuclear bomb. And then now human beings had the ability to vaporize entire cities in an instant, in a second. That's what happened between 1914 and 1945. The loss of liturgical Christianity, the loss of Christ, and then the loss of God. And that's what happened. You can't say perfectly one absolutely leads to the other, but you also can't say that one had nothing to do with the other. But I want to say something to you that perhaps will disturb you at the moment. The worst loss hadn't happened yet. Wait, you're saying. We lost liturgical Christianity. We lost a whole society that went to Mass every Sunday and received the Lord. We lost Jesus Christ and we lost connection to God. And the worst thing was still to come? Yes, it was. In 1950, now that we had suffered through, and excuse me for giving a really horrific list, but it happened, and so we have to remember it. The suffering through the trauma of finding out what had happened at Auschwitz and those and other places. All of the hundreds of millions dead from literally 100 million dead from communists just murdering people. Hundreds of millions of dead from bombs and war and fighting over that period. The best young men, and in some cases young women as well, of those years just thrown in front of cannons is essentially what happened. And then in 1950, 5 years after that, still not recovered from it, 1 million new products of a brand new products were sold in the United States in 1950 for the first year, 1 million, and it's never been less than $1 million. This was an invention that was invented in the 1920s and 30s. But because of the Second World War, it got put on the shelf because all the technology and everything had to go into fighting the war. After the Second World War, people started to develop this technology. You're starting to know what I'm talking about, right? And then by 1950, 1 million television sets sold in the United States. Here's the problem. We never said, look what we did on our own. We never said we need God. We need Christ. We need the sacraments back. After 1950, we turned on the television and we never turned it off. Instead of returning to God, we sat down and we watched I Love Lucy and Walter Cronkite and the Mary Tyler Moore Show, all of which are great. I'm not opposed to any of those things, but you see what I'm saying. We went indoors, we turned on the TV, and we isolated from one another. And we never dealt with what had happened from 1914 to 1945. The worst loss is not the loss of the liturgical church. It's not the loss of Christ. It's not the loss of God. The worst loss is what happened to us after 1950, and it blossomed in the 1960s and 70s. It's the loss of reality. We stopped being connected to reality. We spent hours and hours looking at a screen and losing contact with reality. That's where we are now. If I had to say, what happened to the modern world? I would say it lost the church, it lost Christ, it lost God, it invented television, and it lost contact with reality. In my state, the state of California, there's no longer such a thing as boys and girls. Now, you think maybe I'm exaggerating, but in a legal sense, and we use the bathroom as the example. Well, why do we use the bathroom? Because that's the main place where these things happen. But a boy can go in the girl's bathroom, a girl can go in the boy's bathroom, because there's no distinction. That's not real. That's not real. That's a problem we have in our mind. And I know there are some people who have an actual problem in their mind. That is, their mental state doesn't match their body. But that's a small problem. You know, there's people who have, cataracts. There's people that have high blood pressure. There's some people whose mental state doesn't match their body. They think they're fat when they're really thin. That's called anorexia. They think they're a boy when they're really a girl. That's called dysphoria, gender dysphoria or sexual dysphoria. But that's not the problem I'm talking about. I'm talking about a problem that a society can't say basic things anymore, like there are such things as boys and such things as girls. We've lost contact with reality. I said at the beginning, I hoped that what we would get out of this conversation, other than just depressing you, I hope I didn't just depress the heck out of you, is a sense of how important our faith is. It was the people who received the Eucharist year after year, decade after decade, century after century in families, who built Christendom, who invented polyphonic music and artistic perspective and the great cathedrals. And they were on the verge of doing something great when they got hit by a terrible plague and also 100 years of war between France and Great Britain. And they lost it. Their society started to break. And so it wasn't ready when it was faced with challenges like Martin Luther or like the deists or like Charles Darwin and evolution. It wasn't strong enough to face those things. And it broke down and went crazy with 2 world wars and a worldwide depression before just giving up and turning on the TV. The answer to this is not that complicated. Christ in the Eucharist builds culture. Christ in the Eucharist builds society. The Eucharist is not just a thing that I do to go get fed every week. When I go every week and I assist at that Mass, I'm doing my part just like all of those Carthusian and Benedictine monks and nuns did. All of those moms and dads did from the year, from the dark times, really hard times of the 600s and the 700s and the 800s. And little by little, something beautiful was built until, in the 1400s, when a person like Joan of Arc lived. Joan of Arc was basically a middle-class person. She had a great life. This was not a dark age she lived in. It was a beautiful age. And it produced beautiful people. And it produced souls that were fully alive. And we can do it again. But here's the thing. There's a time for reaping and a time for sowing. And you and I are never, ever going to live in a time for reaping. We will spend the rest of our lives, and our children will spend their lives, and their children will spend their lives in a time of sowing. We have to sow these seeds again. Families that celebrate the Eucharist together. Communities like these beautiful two communities that you have. I mean, I realize there's probably some of you that just come for the beer and the wine, but I imagine most of you, you know that you're planting the seeds. You're letting the seeds be planted within you and then going out into the world to receive them. When I go to Mass, I receive the one thing that every soul needs, communion. And then I get in my car and somebody cuts me off at the, pulling in to get gas. Okay? My whole mindset has to be different than yelling at that person or what are they lacking? Because 500 years they've been robbed of it. They're lacking communion. They need what I have. So I have to bring communion to them by being Christ, by letting the Christ who's within me speak to them with kindness and be patient with them and not make things worse, but make things better. We live in a time of planting seeds. It's a great opportunity that we have. We only have a few more years left. And then we're all off, as the Pope says, then off to the house of the Father. Nothing should intimidate us. We should be so proud of our Christian faith. Not proud because we're sinfully proud, but proud like St. Paul was proud. I boast of Jesus Christ crucified. I boast of receiving him in baptism and the Eucharist. And I want everybody to have that. I want everybody to have that. There is no shortcut. There is no political answer. There is no media answer. One by one, we have to invite other people into the communion that we have. And even if we fail 1,000,000 times, our job is very easy. We're just sowers, just plant the seed. Then someone else will complete the call, maybe even after we're gone from this world. It's a beautiful life we've been called to. A life at the beginning of a new world that will again one day be something called Christendom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cy. Outstanding perspective, very knowledgeable, very exciting to think about what we can continue to do going forward to sow, especially since so many of us have been the beneficiaries of a life and a family where we had a chance to reap growing up. And so I want to encourage everyone to put your cursor over the screen and click on the word chat to submit your questions. And we have several coming in already, Cy. For those of you who have not had a chance to meet yet, my name's Michael Lancelot, along with Jim Dwyer. I'm a founding board member for Faith and Ale. And so question number one here of several, Cy, do you plan on writing more books?
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking about writing a book called Whatever Happened to the Modern World. That occurs to me that maybe that should be the next one, because I do think I'd like to talk more about these. I found it very hard to write the book about Jesus, mostly because I would write things that I thought were really smart, and then the editor, Todd Eglier-Lara, would go, not that smart. So I found that it was a very humbling experience. But yes, I think I'll maybe this will be the next one, this that we just talked about.
Outstanding. And how about the current books? How can our viewers obtain them?
Oh, you can go to shop.catholic.com, or you can go to catholic.com and just click our shopping website. And then you have to pre-order it because it will actually get in the mail sometime in April. And if I may, since you asked me about it, the point of this book is to be a really simple book about Jesus, because my feeling was that we get a lot of calls at Catholic Answers Live from people who don't even know the basics about Jesus. Like, they don't know anything. And so I wanted to have a book where if someone was interested, or maybe a son or daughter who has left the faith because they didn't ever quite make the connection with Jesus, you could just give them the book. It's not a hard book. It's not an academic book. But I mean, to me, introducing people to Jesus is everything. I mean, if you want to solve all the world's problems, more Jesus. The more Jesus we got, the better off we all are.
And so one of the places in the modern world where we lose our children and grandchildren is when they head off to college. And then even after that side, when they're in their 20s and 30s, building their career, starting a family, and their faith takes somewhat of a backseat. What advice can you give the parents and grandparents on how to approach and deal with their children and grandchildren without furthering the distance between them?
Yes, I have a daughter, my oldest daughter, who told me, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, she said, "Dad, I know that religion is really important to you. It's just not that important to me." And I don't know if that hurts you or not, but it's just not that important to me. And so, that's I guess I kind of wrote the Jesus book for her too, because I want to put it in her hand. She has to read it. Her dad wrote it, so she has to read it. But she's a wonderful person. She's this 27-year-old who I'm just super proud of, but she doesn't see how it connects to her. And so somehow we have to make it connect. We have to help it connect. And the primary way, of course, is to live it. And then, like, my daughter gave us some good news the other day about she's applying to graduate school, and she got some good news about it. And my wife said, "Thank you, Jesus." And I could see my daughter stiffen just a little bit, but I think my wife's attitude is, I'm not going to stop talking about Jesus just because you don't want to hear about Jesus. I mean, thank you, Jesus. And so, I mean, I guess I mentioned my daughter in part to say, if I was really a saintly person who knew, I suppose I wouldn't have that problem myself. But all I know how to do is to keep it in front of her. If she comes for a meal at our house, we pray before meal, and we pray for everybody, and we thank God for everybody, and all that. So, and then I suppose I would like her to see that we love other people as well. So we try to at least let her know that, caring for the poor in our little town, and it's important to us. And we know that that's what Jesus called us to. So, I guess Bishop Barron always says there's 3 ways to come to Jesus. One of them is through beauty, like Paul Claudel did. You just walk into Notre Dame Cathedral and all of a sudden you believe in God because it's so beautiful. The other one is truth. And that's what we do at Catholic Answers. We just try to, and the last one is goodness. And I think a lot of young people need to see us being good, just being good, and connecting that with our faith in God, and that will attract them.
Well, certainly one of the gifts that God gave us was free will. And so
right.
In this case, our children and grandchildren are exercising the free will. And away from their faith was perhaps a choice they made at a given time, right, Si?
Yes, right. And I understand that why God, I am grateful God gave me free will. I'm not that grateful that he gave it to my children. I feel like, I don't, I could have made these decisions for them. You could have just left it up to me.
Next question, Si. Christendom was built on a collapsed Roman Empire. do we need the collapse of the United States in order to have a return to a strong Christendom?
I don't know. I mean, you can say I hope not. I mean, I always feel like one advantage we have is that Christianity is deeply ingrained in our society. I met and interviewed one time a bishop from Africa who was an actual missionary bishop. Like the guy would get on a donkey and ride out into the brush and visit a village and tell them about Jesus. And he said to me, you know, you Americans don't understand that your society is deeply Christian. Even the people who don't believe it, that they've already had hundreds of years of influence so that they believe in, you know, certain level of behavior or certain things that come from Christianity. I mean, the primary one that many people have forgotten, and we get a bad rap on this, but it's not true, is the equality of men and women. That's an idea that comes from the Bible. There's good luck finding that anywhere else in the world, you know. And so he'll say things like, you know, like, you Americans believe in things like the equality of men and women. He goes, they're shocked when I go out to the bush country in Africa and tell them men and women are equal. He said, a lot of times the women are like, sign me up. I think I'm a Christian.
Great answer there. Is it fair to say our world didn't so much lose Jesus and God, but that we chose to replace them with our own egos?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Like, I think part of what happens after the creation of the great universities of Europe, and then the creation of what ultimately ended up in the Industrial Revolution, but it was in tremendous wealth. I mean, the Italian maritime republics in the 1400s were the wealthiest place on earth. And those were very, very Catholic places, but that money tempts you and it corrupts you. And so, yeah, I think that there's something to that, you know, we all know this personally too, that sometimes when things are going hard, we're very focused on God. But when things are going well, it's really easy to let that focus drift a bit, you know, maybe not here in Florida, but we do in California. So yes, I think that is part of it.
So many Catholic speakers identify as apologists. Do you enjoy apologetics and identify that way?
I don't think of myself as an apologist. No, I don't. I mean, at the basic, if you said, what are you? I'd say I'm a radio host. You know, like I have an undergraduate degree in theology that I'm very, very grateful for. And I feel like I have a graduate degree in theology from sitting and listening to Tim Staples and Jimmy Akin for the last 4.5 years, and Carlo and Trent. But I don't think of myself as an apologist, mostly because I see how well trained these apologists are. You know, they take a question, for example, like, where is purgatory in the Bible? And they learn all of the verses, all of the arguments. They learn the counter arguments. And I've never, well, that's a lot of work. I've never put on, I mean, I'm way too lazy to be an apologist. So I'm going for radio hosts.
Okay. Well, speaking of which, what's the best way to view Catholic Answers? Relevant Radio does not appear to carry it in their lineup. And do you recommend that we contact Relevant Radio and request that they carry your show?
Well, it would be wonderful, but I don't think they're going to. And this, a few years ago, I mean, we were on some of their stations, and they let us go. Because I don't know if people know how this works, but we make the radio show, and we're able to do it with money that donors give to us. So when you give money to Catholic Answers, we make the radio show. Radio stations don't pay us for it. We just give it to anybody. So, for example, it runs on Cradio down in Australia. Well, they just get it. They don't have to pay for it. So what Relevant Radio's model is very different than that. And they have a different way of doing business. And we tried to work with them, but it just didn't seem to be a fit. And I actually have to say, I think that that's a positive thing in a way. Like, I think it's really good to have like 10 different types of Catholic media rather than just EWTN. And I'm probably not supposed to say that, and I'll probably get in trouble with EWTN, but it's like having the problem of there's different ones that are doing different things is a good problem to have. So I love them. I know many of the people at Relevant Radio. I love many of them. It's just that they're doing a different thing, and they don't want us. I mean, they don't need us to do that. So it's great for our ego if you would call and tell them you want us, but I don't think that that's the direction they're going. They're trying to do a different thing.
So what would be the best way to view Catholic Answers?
Okay, so the best way is we have an app called the Catholic Answers Live app, and you can just download the app on your phone. But we're on Sirius Satellite Radio on channel 130. You can get us on the app. You can get us on YouTube or Facebook. Every day we're on YouTube and Facebook Live. You can get us on our own website live or pre-recorded at Catholic.com. And you can just get the EWTN radio app too, because we go through the EWTN radio. So it'll play live there. All of those ways will work.
Perfect. So Catholic.com to listen to your show and Catholic.com to order your book.
Yeah, both. Right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I'll wait while you do that.
Okay. So, Cy, what is your thought about the idea of the Benedict option, that sacramental Christians ought to retract and reconstruct an authentically Christian culture rather than trying to retake the social and cultural institutions of the modern world?
I don't think we're going to have a choice. I mean, nobody's going to let us. I mean, what are we going to take over? The trend is going the other direction. So Rod Dreher, I think, did a beautiful job in his book, The Benedict Option. I really do. And I know a lot of people are very negative about it. And many people that I respect are quite negative about it. But I don't feel negative about it. I think it's one way of looking at it. However, if what Dreher is saying, and I don't think this is what he's saying, but some people take it this way, is withdraw from the world and just kind of be like, I don't know, like the Amish or something, who are wonderful. I love the Amish, but Catholicism is not Amish. It's a different thing. So I think the primary insight from his book, The Benedict Option, is the world is in worse shape than you think. Like if you're holding out hope, it's in worse shape than you think. And I agree with him. I agree with him 100% on that. But his second thing is, if you have that insight that the world is in worse shape than you think, then just live what he would have said was Catholic faith. Now he's Orthodox, but live that liturgical Christianity in a community and do it without any compromise. And I agree with that. However, another friend of mine, Dr. Carrie Gress, followed up after he wrote The Benedict Option, and she wrote a book called The Marian Option. And I think she makes a really good point. Her point is, Mary's been appearing in places like Lourdes and Fatima, especially Fatima, to tell us what we should do. And that her point throughout the book is just listen to Mary and do what Mary tells you to do. She knows more about it than you do. She knows more about it than Rod Dreher does. And I kind of, when I read her book, I was like, I think she's right about this. And what's Mary telling us to do? She's telling us to fast and pray. She's telling us to pray the rosary. And she's telling us repent and live in peace. Live in peace with other people. So I don't think you can do better than that. And if by the Benedict Option people mean withdraw from the world, we can't, because Jesus said, go out. He didn't say, come back, just live in here. He said, go out. So that's my take on that.
Great. Thank you. Well, Father Bob mentioned tomorrow's feast day. And as you know, Cy, this year is the year of St. Joseph. And so the next question is, with ongoing destruction of the nuclear family, the year of St. Joseph is a critical opportunity to strengthen fatherhood. It seems the family is the building block of society. How do you feel it can be rebuilt?
I mean, the conversion, a heart has to be converted to Christ, really, to really believe in chastity today, and to really believe in fidelity, and to really believe in marriage as permanent. You know, so I'm not trying to do an advertisement for my book, but I don't see, it's not a thing where you can do it by a program. Although there's a lot of good programs. It's fundamentally, it comes down to converting hearts to Christ. Did I lose you?
Nope, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought maybe that might sound one. I apologize. So I think fundamentally it comes down to that. I do think, you know, men need to become fathers and to become really good at being fathers. They need other men who will kind of show them what to do. We all need that. And so especially because a lot of kids are children of divorce now, we're going to have to provide that in other ways. So that's the only other thing I would say. I love a radio program called The Catholic Man Show. I think it's good for young men to hear from these other young men who are like, they're welcoming children. They want to have, you know, as many children as God will send them. But they do things like, I don't know, like check out the latest crossbow or drink the latest whiskey. Just to, this I think allows. Well, you have beer, and that's like, men like beer. We got to be realistic about drawing men out of the computer, especially where pornography is involved. You know, we need to make those male connections so that men will get away from that, because that's the family killer right there. I think is the internet pornography.
Absolutely. Si, I had asked you when we spoke yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, if we could post this video of your message tonight for the benefit of those who did not have the opportunity to sit in tonight on Zoom. So I want to thank you on behalf of both of our apostolate groups for agreeing to that. I know for sure, everyone, it will be posted at faithandale.com, probably in a couple of days. And then I know Jim Dwyer will be communicating with the Faith and Wine Lee County women to look to have it on their website as well. So for the individual Mary who had asked that question, it will be available for sure on Faith and Wine and Faith and Ale's websites. Here's a question for you, Si. If men and women are considered equal, why can women not be priests in the Catholic Church?
That's so funny. My 22-year-old son just asked me that the other day, and he probably didn't ask it as nice as this person is asking it. It was confrontational. And, you know, at root, there are certain things about the sacraments that we can guess at or make a reasoned appraisal of, but we can't know for certain. So why does Christ only use wine for confecting the precious blood? And we can guess at that, and we could say, well, I mean, it's got a spiritual side, you know, because wine makes you feel good, and so it's kind of pointing to that. And also wine is seems to be kind of a universal around the world, and also red wine has that blood quality. So there are all these things, right? But fundamentally, the reason that we only use wine is because we're not the Lord. The Lord is the Lord. And that's what he said, that's what he did anyways. That's what he showed us. And so we have to imitate it as perfectly as we can. So this is what I said to my son, and I don't think he liked it very much. And that's okay. At least he's interested. But the reason that we do the sacraments the way we do the sacraments is because Jesus is the Lord of the sacraments. I'm not the Lord of the sacraments. You're not the Lord of the sacraments. And we can And so a lot of times when people answer this question, they'll go, well, they'll start talking about, well, the male, can be the bridegroom and Jesus is the bridegroom and all of that is to me like asking, why did he use wine? Well, you can guess, you can say, because wine has these features and it doesn't have those features. Well, why did he only ordain men? Well, you could guess and say, because men have these features and women have these features and, men, respond this way and women respond that way. But all of that would just be guesses, at least to my mind. The fundamental thing is, I'm not the Lord, he's the Lord. He's the Lord of the sacraments. But I would note one thing, and that is this. Christianity is a feminine religion. It really is. When you practice Islam, the men go to the mosque, right? Even Judaism, as beautiful as it is, it's the most beautiful religion in the world, except for the one Christ founded. Much more masculine religion, one where the male practice of the faith has always been seen as more important than the female. Every religion in the world tends towards being a thing for men. Only Christianity, you go into a Christian church, go to a Catholic church sometime. There's more women there than men. For some reason, Christ knew what he was doing. I don't know why he did it that way, but he knew what he was doing and we could see the fruits of it. If it were up to me, it would not be that way. I would choose something different, but I'm not the Lord. So, and you can know something by its fruits. I don't know why it has those fruits. I mean, it's also true that Christ gave his life for us. And I think that's a whole lot different than Muhammad getting on the back of a horse with a sword. One of them is very appealing to men who want to get on horses with swords, want to fight, and want to be what Thomas Aquinas called, what did he call Islam? He said it's a very voluptuous, he used another word, tactile or physical religion. Whereas Christianity, because it's about a man who gives his life for others, calls for something completely different from men than Islam does or any other religion does. And so that's the only reason, that's the only answer I have is Christ is the Lord of the sacraments. I'm not, and I trust him that he knows what he's doing. And I know that many people find that an unacceptable answer.
Thank you. One last question, Cy. I actually have two. Two final questions, and then we'll call it an evening. And thank you so much. And then we'll have a final prayer and closing prayer and final blessing. How do we explain to our adult children who have left the Catholic faith about the power of the sacraments that they are missing?
I do agree with the basic advice that you get from the U.S. Catholic bishops, which is live the sacraments, show the difference that they make in your life. But like, there's a couple. Kids leave like my oldest daughter did to be kind of secular, or they leave to be like Calvary Chapel, praise and worship Christian. And of the two, I would prefer the praise and worship Christian, because to that one, at least you can say, let's look at the scriptures together. And especially the 6th chapter of John's gospel, like, what were these Christians doing? Why was Jesus saying these things to them? But, so that would be a different response. But honestly, everything in this life, in this world of media unreality, is pushing against the sacraments. And so, fasting and praying for your children, praying the rosary for them, and then living the sacraments yourself. I wish I had a magic bullet, but I don't think there is a magic bullet. Again, we plant seeds, and we have to understand that this is not a time of reaping. This is a time of planting. Mm-hmm.
By the way, to add to the question on women as priests, one of our viewers offered this insight. God selected a woman to be the mother of Jesus. At the Last Supper, if Jesus wanted women, he would have invited them. So let's instead honor God. And that was from...
Well, it's also true that God had to choose a woman to be Jesus' mother because God is not from California. And there is a difference in men and women everywhere else but California.
Well, speaking of places around the world like California, do you think globalism will strengthen the world economy and people worldwide will leave Christianity because they will feel they have everything and no longer need God?
Yeah, I think that will I mean, it's already happening. But also you have places like Japan where it's, a tremendously tremendously secular country, Japan, and there's a kind of despair there. And so I think there's another way in which a place like Japan is open to evangelization, and we need to be serious about evangelizing such places. I mean, Europe too is becoming very secular, but also, is open bit by bit to more evangelization. The root question of globalism is what's at the center of it. And if the center of it is money, it won't work. If the center of it is pleasure, it won't work. If the center of it is just prosperity, it won't work. If at the center of it is God, it'll work. That's that's the hard truth. That's what the story of the Tower of Babel is about. Try to build the tower to heaven without God, and that will not work. It never has. It never will. So the whole thing comes down to a question of who's at the center of it, or what's at the center of it. And if it's God, then it will work. It will be fine. If it's not, it won't. Remember the Psalm says, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build. That's what we're doing. We're laboring in vain because we're not letting the Lord build the house. We're building the house we want.
Outstanding program tonight, Cy. Thank you so much for being with us. I know you're traveling, but we really, really appreciate your insights, your being here for us, and we want to wish you continued success as you do the important work at Catholic Answers and the important work in the Lord's name. Thank you so very much.
Could I just say one thing? I'm so grateful for those kind words, but I would like to say the work that you're doing, that's the work. That's it. I feel so proud and happy to be in the same church with you, that you get together and have these evenings to talk and to meditate on Christ the Lord, because that's what's going to make all the difference. So I'm very grateful for your kind words, but thank you for letting me be part of it.
Absolutely.